all right, all right. We should be live. Says we're live.
Hello, hello.
Right, I'm looking at the stream. There we go.
Oh,
Took a little longer than usual to get the appropriate feedback, but we
yeah.
are live,
Whew.
and it's going to be great tonight. RH Snow will unfortunately not be joining us currently, but we will have a guest show up tonight to help discuss today's awesome topic of tabletop and how it's kind of affected our writing or how we have written around it and created things for it and those things within the tabletop verse that we have pulled from to help inspire us and get us to this point in our own writing journeys.
Indeed, and it's oftentimes it's like overlooked. The advantages of having, well, not just like D&D, but the whole myriad of wonderful tabletop systems that one can, like an author, can use to help flesh out characters, settings, and especially, and most importantly, the world building. Also, magic systems, monsters, you name it. Like everything can be used within the realm of the tabletop RPGs and improved upon. Yeah.
Very much so. And it's kind of interesting because tabletop's actually kind of grown. That I first started creating my own world separately without any real idea of adding in tabletop. But as I've expanded it, every time I introduce people to the world, they seem to always say, "Oh, this would be an awesome campaign," or "It would be a great place,
Yeah.
for some RPGs." So very much, I think tabletop is probably the most lore centric form of gaming that I've seen so far. It seems like the lore kind of is really what sets it up, as it seems the rules are kind of just how you explore this world you're in.
Indeed, it's one of the major gripes that most of us have with current day, let's say, Hollywood writing. It's that they don't respect the lore, and they basically spit on the established rules within a setting, and this is why, how should I say it mildly, they suck. They like everything they do, almost everything they do sucks. Literally
Definitely
sucks.
now. They don't have respect for the lore, and then I've heard some things in the back end. I like keeping track of the movie news and stuff, and word is that all the writers are focusing on what they can tell, or what can they teach people by using these particular stories. And I think when you think that way, it's almost impossible to respect something for what it is, because then they got to morph it and change it. And already before the whole wokeness kind of invaded, we already had to deal with Hollywood already trying to put their own brand on whatever they can get their hands on. And like you said, just morph it into what they think it should be and how they think it should be displayed to the masses, which is really a shame, because they probably have some of the farthest reach when it comes to introducing people to new forms of fiction, and all of it's been watered down with their own flavor,
Uh,
which people are just tired of.
they have the reach, but they don't have the moves. Like a friend often says, they may have like the tools, but they don't have the moves. That's exactly what she says. Yeah. So talking specifically when it comes to when we specifically talk about world building, this is where they lack the most, because as you very well know from your own quite extensive world building, um, it's time consuming and labor consuming, and you have to um, keep it, how should I say, keep it grounded within the rules of your lore, your already established lore. So when you create something new, it doesn't break the rules and the lore, which is often what they do because they have not done their homework. And when they try to make something, it's, of course, it's not anything new. They just copy something and just like change the skin of it. It fails. And this being like mostly characters, even uh, new powers in the case of superheroes and stuff. And yeah,
Definitely. I think I even heard just recently that they're going back for some more reshoots for their latest Captain America project. Because, as you know, that's another one that they changed up. You know, they uh, changed up Captain America. Now they're still struggling to reintroduce the new Captain America into that essentially, burning heap of a fire franchise that they got going on.
yeah, it's unfortunate, and especially especially when you see what they've done with beloved franchises, um, how they treat the already established lore and characters like legacy characters to place like their own. They have to destroy the legacy characters. They have to ruin them. Um, so, huh, it's and it's not working very well for them. If you notice, so yeah, I think we have our guest
Right?
here with
There we
us.
go.
Yes,
Hail.
hello. Finally,
Welcome.
finally got these computer issues figured out. Seems like maybe mostly.
Yeah, it's the Windows says they are our mortal enemy.
Yep, always trying to pull some kind of nonsense. Anyways, good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Hello, sir.
It's
Welcome to the conversation.
Thank you
Yeah,
for having
indeed.
me.
We're just like
Rambling, really.
doing yeah, a rambly sort of an introduction, and we touched a few points about how the TTRPGs, it doesn't matter the system, can be quite helpful when we establish lore, set up rules, and most importantly, do the quite essential world building. And I went on a short ramble about how modern Hollywood actually fails epically when it comes to world building. Yeah, perhaps they should have taken their time with it, but they're too lazy and too obnoxious to actually consider doing actual work. It's beneath them.
Oh, why do actual work when you can just try to take advantage of a known name and a known property and assume that a baked-in audience will show up, even though, people have limits on their patience.
Yeah, yes, we can. We were already seeing that. That's transpiring before our very eyes.
It has been transpiring for about 15 years now.
Yeah, That's
Really
that's
longer
probably,
than that. If
yeah. It's
deep into
probably
it.
in its last stage of transpiring. It's like,
One can hope, but yeah, you do touch upon a good point in terms of using tabletop games and the like with that for helping to build worlds, build systems, and establish different elements in writing. Because realistically, and it all depends on how hard one goes in on the story aspect of a tabletop game, and depending on the game and who you ask, you'll find plenty of people who would say that the story has no place in it. Okay, fair enough. To me, at that point, if you're excising all semblance of story from a game that you're playing on the tabletop, obviously depends on the game. If we're talking a role playing game, if you're excising all elements of story from that, well, you're essentially just playing a trimmed down tabletop war game at that point. To me, that's wildly uninteresting. If I want to play a tabletop war game, I will choose a tabletop war game to play. If I'm playing a role playing game, it's because I want to get invested in a role and get invested in an adventure and a little bit of story. The grognards out there might not like me for saying that, at least a certain subsect of them. I don't care.
Yeah, and it's very interesting you say that too, because when I think of tabletop, you have a setting, but what is a setting without a good story? Where are you going to go? At that point, you're just using the setting as an excuse to calculate numbers. It's like, where's the fun in that?
yeah, and to push modernist failed agendas, to shove them in people's throats and hope that they would not regurgitate it. It's like, this is, it's folly, and then maybe on a subconscious level they actually realize it's folly, but their pride and their arrogance will not let them actually stop. And yeah.
That's something that I found is kind of interesting in my many years in this hobby. Because I mean, I've been playing these types of games since I was 9 or 10 years old. I've been doing this for almost 30 years, and I've been writing for almost as long too. So both of those things for me, both of those things are very closely intertwined to each other. How I gamed influenced what and how I write, and vice versa. It's very cyclical in that sense when it comes to me. But something I've noticed interesting in the last decade or so, you touched on the modernists basically coming in and trying to stamp out any ideas, any stories, any of that stuff that people, or that they deem unacceptable, that people might do at their private tables that they don't have to be in. They could just exercise a little bit of self-determination, but if they actually cared about that, well, they wouldn't really be complaining about the things they're complaining about. My point, anyway, though, is it's kind of funny to see there is a similar sentiment in some circles on the opposite end that is also parroted by the people who are just adamantly against all forms of story in tabletop RPGs, where it's, again, like you said, James, at that point, what's the point? The context of what you're doing is what makes it interesting. Well, guess what? The context of what you're doing is where the story is. The context of why you're fighting the dragon in the cave is where the story is. It can be the most minimal bit of context there. It could be, well, you're a barbarian. You heard the dragons in the cave. You want to prove your strength and get the treasure. Okay, yeah. Is that a particularly interesting and engaging story? No. But it's still a story. It's still there.
Yep. And could you tell more about your background in tabletop RPGs for our viewers?
Yeah, sure. So I got started in the tabletop gaming space about 1996, 1997, where I went over to a friend of mine's house. And my best friend, when I was in elementary school, and his stepdad had gotten hold of an early test version of third edition Dungeons and Dragons. And he happened to have one of the early test versions of the first adventure path they were going to publish with the game, which was a reprint of a classic low-level adventure path, the Sunless Citadel. I will never forget playing that for the first time, that stuck with me when I was like a 9-year-old kid to now being 37 years old today. It was literally a life-changing day sitting at the table with my best friend and his stepdad telling us what's going on with these giant rats in this old rundown citadel, and me playing the pre-made elf cleric that he made, trying desperately not to die because I just happened to be the unlucky one that was at the front of the group when we got ambushed by this swarm of like 8 giant rats. And from there, like as they sometimes say, the rest is history. From there I kind of expanded my repertoire over the years of games I've played. I've gone from playing D&D to Pathfinder, which was a very natural evolution because Pathfinder, the original version of it, was born from 3rd edition D&D. Then I went back, played some of the older editions, tried those out with friends that I made later on down the line, and branched it into other games too. Call of Cthulhu, Savage Worlds, which is probably to this day still my favorite tabletop system. Dungeon Crawl Classics, some more independent ones like Maze Rats, and so on and so forth. A couple of the Star Wars games, and like I could sit here and really try to remember all the ones I've played, but we'd be here all night.
Yeah.
But yeah, from playing those games, and then later on reading some of the books that came for D&D, like the Forgotten Realms books, which I've done a couple reviews of on my Substack, Tales of Calamity and Triumph. I started sort of branching out into like trying to write my own fantasy stories and a little bit of sci-fi, most of it being terrible because I'm in middle school and high school getting my start. Go back to those times, I read what I wrote back then sometimes to remind myself where I started, and the cringe is very real and very painful. But over the course of 2.5 decades, I kind of grew from that. Took a couple of writing classes in college, workshop-based classes, which I firmly hold to the idea that a workshop-based writing class is going to do much more for anybody than just being lectured at what good writing is by a teacher. And yeah, playing games, writing stories, letting those two worlds intersect, and now here I sit on this panel.
I remember distinctly when we met first on Minds that I watched a lot of your videos on your YouTube channel back then.
Yep.
And
It's been a
we
few years since I've done
exchanged
anything with that.
we exchanged lots of comments. We did some chat about D&D in particular, and you and one other guy joined in one of my games, one of my Star Shutter based D&D games, which unfortunately we were unable to complete. But still, it was an interesting experience. Yeah, that's
Yeah, it was a brief but fun time.
Yeah.
Sadly, the eternal struggle with tabletop games and writing. I mean, the struggle they both share is, scheduling.
Yeah,
Trying to find the
scheduling.
time to actually do
Yeah.
these things when we
Very
actually
true.
can.
Very true. I hope the current one sticks, the current game, because it's so far it's been like so much fun, and I'm finally able to add a little bit more character work and bits of world building because of it, because I'm using the TTRPG to test some things, streamline them, polish them, and then write about them in the books. So It is quite useful. What about you, James?
I'd say I'd probably had the most minimal interactions with RPGs as a whole. I've done most of my RPing almost in like this free form way where it's just bunch of people in a group. Here's a story, and we all kind of add our own portions one after another. See where the story takes.
I did a lot of that
Yes.
too.
Yes,
That's fun.
that is very fun, and got into a lot of fun adventures with that. And I think another place that I pulled a lot of story inspiration from was also just massive multiplayer online games, because I think they're actually
Ooh.
probably some of the closest to like tabletop RP, in the sense that you could really just get a group together and go explore a digital world somewhere, and really either interact with your roles or create your own RP as you go, which I've done multiple times, which usually consisted of characters just standing around in a big empty dungeon, but it was still pretty fun.
Yeah, I've done that a lot too.
Yeah, yeah.
I've been in both of those worlds also.
I,
Absolutely. And
I,
I think
yeah.
I think one great thing about that is you actually get to create your own meta narratives within an already existing world, which is kind of the really great part about the RP thing. You're taking an existing world, you're thrusting yourself down into the middle of it. You can be in a magnificent battle at some of the most important regions, or you can just be a farm boy in the middle of nowhere, hanging out with your dogs. Like, this is all possible within the realm of RP and your mind, and where you can take it and where it can expand to, or you can just make it nice, small, and just placed in the middle of nowhere. So it's a real interesting way, like you said, to explore narratives as well as just explore the more finite things of your world and get questions going. Because, like I said, if you're just a farm boy in the middle of your world, what does that look like? What is it, just a basic farm like it is in ours? Or is there separate creatures he's got to worry about? Are there rodents that we've never seen before? They're going to eat his crops, which we have no distinct name for in our world. Like, how far does it go to be a farm boy in your world? And as a world builder, it, like I said, it helps you think about that really small narrative and how these things can impact the grander world as a whole. Because small things often have large implications, even if we don't wholly think about them.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. That's including the littlest things like weeds and bugs that could eat your crops, or um, let's say a specific kind of wood, which when it rots and you burn it and people inhale the smoke, they get sick. Yeah, that's something.
Yeah. Yeah, just like, just as the same as, when you're writing narrative, when you're writing prose, when it comes to, particularly when you're the one running these games, the devil is in the details. How
Yes.
you present these details, how you compile them, and what you choose to present. And then also, just the same as, when writing a story, what elements you need to present, determining what's actually important for your players to know is the exact same as a writer determining what is important for the readers to know. What information actually needs to be put out there, what is pertinent. Now, one of the big differences, obviously, between running a tabletop game and writing a book is going to be that a tabletop game, the GM, the DM could arguably wrest full control over it. But in my many years of experience, you will often find that most players will not enjoy that very much. They're going to want a little bit of freedom to act as they will, because they're engaged in it directly as well. It's not quite a one-for-one as writing a book. You write a book, you're the one writing it, you're presenting the story, you are the end-all be-all, you are the arbiter. When you're running a game, you're presenting the world, you're presenting the plot, you're presenting the history.
Yes,
and that's
and
the
you
framework
get
in which the characters that are run by everyone else at the table then interact with what you
and you
present.
get an immediate feedback from the players. Yeah,
Yes.
that's probably one of the best things.
Yeah, and it can lead to some moments of absolute chaos. Something I mentioned, or how I mentioned previously, I reviewed a couple of Forgotten Realms books on my Substack. Specifically, I reviewed the 3 books in the House of Serpents trilogy by Lisa Smedman. And one thing I've learned firsthand and secondhand over the years is that when your writing is kind of tied into how you interact with these sorts of games, you have to be very careful, very, very careful not to let the game bleed into your writing unless that's a really specific goal that you have. Like, I know nowadays a real popular genre that's gotten real popular is the game lit and lit RP genres, which are literally fantasy fiction that is set in the world of some kind of game. And then with the lit RP version being one where it's like the mechanics are a core
the mechanics,
part of the story
you have
itself.
to explain them.
Not my thing. I tend not to be the biggest fan of that, but there's a lot of people who are really enjoying that sort of thing. If that's your specific goal, obviously this doesn't apply. But when it came to reading this trilogy of books, I recall in the first one, I had an instance where towards the end of the book, there's a moment that happens in one of the later chapters where the main character, rogue by the name of Arvin, discovers that a special item that he's had with him for a long time actually has more importance to him than just being like, hey, this is a trinket, this is a memento that my mother left me before she died. Turns out that there's actually a lot more importance to it than just that, and he's able to get some useful powers out of it. Well, the description of him figuring out what these abilities are, what they can do, and how often he can use them, ends up feeling like, as somebody who's played these games a lot, I felt like a player who was being read an ability description, a spell description from a book that I didn't own by my dungeon master. I'm like, okay, this was really the only moment in these books where that kind of happened. But there was another particular set of books that I had attempted to read, and I only got about a quarter of the way through the first book before I had to put it down because it was starting to give me a headache, by a gentleman by the name of Ed Greenwood, who was the guy who came up with the Forgotten Realms setting for Dungeons & Dragons. And he wrote a trilogy called Chandril's Saga. I believe the first book was called Spellfire. And in that first quarter of the book opens with events that would have been at the ending of any schlocky D&D style fantasy epic. It opens with a party fighting a powerful Draco Lich and trying to survive against, I'm talking 4 chapters of trying to survive against this Draco Lich and sneaking through its lair, and somehow this tavern girl gets wrapped up in this whole thing and nearly gets trapped, and she and the young squire who's apprenticed to the knight that's in the party get trapped in the cavern with this Draco Lich while the party is fighting it, and then out of nowhere, in comes Elminster, the most powerful wizard.
Not Elminster! Come on!
He just appears through a portal, sees this Draco Lich. Oh, that's a problem. Disintegrates it and leaves. And it's the whole first quarter of the book read just this. And then this happens, and this happens, as if Ed was sitting me down to describe his game to me, rather than actually working to convert the events of it into a workable story. Because how these games work, there's that element of chaos. Players will do things you don't expect. Well, and I don't know for sure if he really said this, but it's attributed to Mark Twain. Like Mark Twain said, of course life is stranger than fiction. Of course fact is stranger than fiction. Fiction has to make sense.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I remember testing um, a couple of characters from my main books, but I never pulled something like that on my players, because that would actually rob them of their enjoyment. I mean, if they're fighting something, or if they're uh, trying to survive a dungeon or whatever it is, like survive a jungle, or build something, or they're in a situation where all of their skills count, and they're brainstorming plans to deal with the world that you've world built, and act upon the lore that you have established, and fit in the framework of the rules that you have established, and then you rob them out of the enjoyment of them doing uh, the thing that they want to do for themselves, and just like dropping some guy or gal like Elminster, who is overwhelmingly powerful, and just like snapping their finger, and solving all of their problems, because for them it's mundane. That's not cool at all.
Yeah, and the book reflected. It felt like a moment in the game where Ed was probably running this game for his group. They were about to die, and he was thinking, "Oh crap! I've got the rest of this idea planned out that I don't want
Ah,
to miss out on. I better save it."
yes, yes.
It was quite. It's literally it's Deus Ex Machina as a writing tool converted into the game. You know,
Yeah, that's something that one of my first teachers, DMs, she taught me to. She warned me to never do it. And I've had a couple of instances where the players had called for, when they were facing like overwhelming odds, they had probably a chance to call for reinforcements, someone who is stronger than them, and they would like knowingly call for reinforcements, and try to hold on, survive until the reinforcements come. But that's entirely different. It's it's nowhere near than the instance where a demigod like Elminster just comes and claps with his hands, and deals with the Draculage. That's no, just no.
yeah.
Right. I mean, imagine in every form of story that happens right out, like, and then Gandalf comes out of nowhere, saves the day in chapter one. It's like, don't worry, Frodo, we'll just take the birds real quick right over there, get rid of that beast.
Well, the funny thing is, it's funny because that happens in The Hobbit. You know, the dwarves and Frodo get captured by the trio of trolls, and Gandalf comes in, breaks the rock, and
Or
turns them all to
Bilbo.
stone right at dawn.
Yeah,
But
there you go.
the difference there is, The Hobbit was a story meant for children, and
Yeah.
The Hobbit was meant to be a precursor and a callback to ancient myth making.
Yes, and Gandalf is a like angelic father figure, and they are kids, pretty much.
But
So,
you already know going in there around the trolls that Gandalf is just hanging out somewhere. It's not
Exactly,
a character you
yeah.
didn't even know was in
yeah,
your
yeah,
scene.
yeah, yeah.
He's
Not
he's
portrayals,
he's
yeah.
he's been present in the story, and you know he's a powerful wizard. So it's still the Deus Ex Machina moment, but it's one of those types of. It's a moment where
It's set
in
up.
the story it's set up and it works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's another aspect of how we could effectively use the tabletops to let's say get immediate feedback from our players about certain character tropes that we would like to our like main heroes or villains to have. And I've done it a number of times, especially let's say with your favorite evil race, evil race in Star Shattered, the Zarans. Um, Thanks to quite a lot of players, the Zarans have this like elaborate established lore about them, and they there is a reason why they do everything that they do. So yeah, because I got grilled early on by a lot of people that I respect, and they gave me excellent feedback, and they made me ask questions, world building questions and character craft questions, which I would otherwise not ask myself, and that helped me immensely.
Yeah, that's actually one lesson that can be very valuable that writers can take from running tabletop games is that if you want to learn how to really successfully run the kind of long lasting games that players are going to want to come back to, you need to talk with them. You need to talk with them not just in the game, not just in the context of gameplay, but you need to talk with them after the fact as well. You need to get their opinions on what they liked, what they didn't like, what works, what doesn't work, so that you can then start to sort of shape the game into something that's more to the speed of what your group enjoys. Of course, you want to take your own enjoyment into consideration as well. You know, as the person running the game, you're playing also. You're invested. You're involved. If you're not liking what you're doing, you're not going to have any drive to actually do it. You need to enjoy it too. But it's important to get the ideas, get the opinions, get the suggestions from your players over what they thought worked well and what they thought didn't, so that you can learn where you need to improve and where you should focus on in terms of what does work and what is enjoyed. It's the same with writing. I can't tell you over the years how many people I've met who have told me, especially because I've been to writing classes, they learn like, oh, you know, my wife and I both took writing classes in college, and then they learn like, oh, you guys took writing classes. Yeah, I've been writing this book for so and so many years, blah blah blah. Oh, cool. Can I read it? Oh no, I'm not letting anyone read it until it's perfect. Well, how is it ever going to be perfect? How are you ever going to perfect it if
Yes,
you don't let someone
yes.
come in, take a look, and give it the editor's eye? We have blind spots. Everyone has their own blind spots.
Yep.
I've got
No
habits
one
in
is
my
no
writing that
one is
I repeat that
perfect.
I know don't work, that I repeat because they're ingrained in me, and sometimes I miss them. Well, that's why I pass my work off to other people to read and catch the errors that I miss. It's true of everybody. You need to be willing to sort of be vulnerable and talk to people and let them look at the flaws in your work and accept that, hey, you know, they're not looking at these flaws to tear me down. They're looking at these flaws to help me recognize where I can get better. And they're looking at the things that work well and can tell me, hey, these things work well. Do more of this.
Yep. It's the way that, especially when I interacted with a whole lot of people, different people from different cultures, because I was not just DMing like in my local club, my local RPG club, but I had like online games, online D&D games, and different people offer different perspectives. And if you're just like yourself, just yourself, working on some, as you just mentioned, like, "Oh, I've been working on this for like 17 years or 20 years. Oh no, I'm not going to publish it because it isn't perfect." Well, nothing will ever be perfect, but you can polish it by giving it to other people, or like what I did, using like the tabletop system to introduce the entire universe of my books, and the lore, and the mechanics and everything, and I was able to basically check pretty much most nuts and bolts of it by doing this, and because of that, you have characters like your favorite Tarran Lord Omasa, and he's delightfully uh, sneaky and scumbaggish General Nettle, and all the rest. So yeah, um, that's all thanks to every single player that played this, immersed themselves into this world, and tested. Uh, in the beginning, my a lot of my broken mechanics, but they were aware that they were testing the mechanics. I specifically told them that, guys, like, I'm learning now. It's not gonna be perfect. Uh, they knew that. So that's another thing that you have to you have to be fair with your readers, and in this case with your players.
Yeah, it's a really great strategy, I think, to really get your world out there, because it's multifaceted. One, like you said, it's a way for you to get immediate feedback, and sometimes
Mhm.
if you're right there sitting at the table with other people, or
At the
say
second,
on
at the
camera
very second,
talk,
yeah.
you can even see their facial expressions, hear their vocal tones, get everything right at the moment, that you wouldn't get to just hearing somebody write stuff down, what they think of your story and things like that. And on top of that, you're also at the same time sharing your world, introducing people to it. In a way, it's its own form of marketing, especially if you were to attach it to, say, a easy to learn system for an average person to pick up, and this becomes the world that is attached to that system. Now you've created an extra layer there of identity for your story as a whole. So that's a really great way. You can take literature, tap into a gaming market that already exists, that is already heavily invested in various forms of lore, and is already used to seeing lots of novels and things of that nature spin off from these games they like playing. It already exists out there. So I think for, say, a lot of writers who focus on writing in the exact same world, like building that world up, it's a very good way to actually expand your audience, as well as save. If, like myself, I'm not too familiar with straight up tabletop, but I've already been doing a lot of research on it for a while. I've done a lot of the free form stuff, and I'm slowly getting into it because I see the the possibilities that
The
are in it.
potential, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
there's a lot there. There's a lot there. So it's something I'm going to be exploring as soon as I'm done with my next story.
And the other thing which I'm sorry, I wanted to talk about, I wanted us to talk about, was um, the fact that it's using the tabletops to improve your storytelling and character craft. This is the probably one of my favorite aspects of it. The ability to improvise and to create on the fly.
Yeah, the improvisational aspect can definitely be a big benefit, um, particularly if you're someone who's got like the kind of writing mind that I do. I tend not to plot very significantly. I have always, or more often, been the type to sort of let a story evolve as I'm working on it. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but generally speaking, I can sort of chart a very general course and then sort of let things go along and then adapt, adjust as needed as I'm working on things. And usually I will end up getting most of my stories end up being, fairly still very consistent. You know, obviously, the more complex something is, the more I'm going to need to actually sit down and plot things out. Particularly if I'm going with something with some complex story about, you know, medieval political intrigue, some Game of Thrones level shit, for example. Yeah, I would need to sit there and plot that out. I can't just put the pieces down and say go, because no, I would need to know how each of these pieces are interacting with each other, how the actions of character A are influencing character B, influences character C, which influences Kingdom A versus Kingdom B, and all that. But since I tend to write stuff that's a little more, you know, pulp fiction themed, my stories are a little bit more simplistic on the plot side, so I can sort of let the characters, if not be the drivers of the story, be the focus, and just kind of put myself in their mindset and go and place situations for them to react to and, you know, engage with. Tabletop games has being somebody who's run tabletop games for so many years and played in them for so many years has made me pretty good at that. But something for me that is even more valuable than that is generating the personality, the voice, and the general feel, idea, really the whole meat and potatoes, so to speak, or rather meat and bones of who some of my characters are. Like, the main set of stories that I've been writing on my Tales of Calamity and Triumph Substack have been following my character of Gyre the Vulganite, who, beginning with the demon from beyond the stars into In the Giant Shadow, and now working on the Aural Sun. Once that's done, we'll have 3 novellas written about her, not published physically yet, but eventually I hope to. But she started out as a tabletop character of mine from a few years ago, in a piracy themed game that one of my friends ran. And I talked to him and said, "Hey, how would you feel instead of me bringing a typical pirate in there? How would you feel about me basically bringing in a Viking?" And he said, "That sounds cool as hell. Do it." And now from there, I've developed a character that I've got an intimate enough knowledge of and expanded on enough from having just played as her and tried to put myself directly in her mindset to react in the moment to things. I have a much clearer idea now of the type of person that she is. So when I write these stories, I now have a much clearer idea of how she would react to certain situations, particularly depending on how they interact with the kind of things she's dealt with in her past.
Yeah, it's sometimes authors who have trouble with different character voices, like naming or even just role playing as a character in tabletop, will be like a great way for them to polish this skill. And in my own experience, because I'm different than you, I'm more of a planner. I had to focus on the improvisation side of it because this is where I was lacking. And in the very beginning, I had like massive writer blocks because I did plan out like a lot of the things, but when I got to like the small details, I couldn't actually think quick enough, and so I did a lot of improvisation just to like train my brain cells to do it. It's what an extent was I successful? I was moderately successful. In the beginning, let's say, my very first intro book to the Star Shuttle series, I made certain concessions, and I missed a point here and a point there because I wasn't still fluid in this way of thinking and character and storycraft. So I will never rewrite it because the feedback from it was indispensable and helped me make the rest of the books really good in this aspect and many others. So yeah, it's and there were like many years of additional tabletop experiences, which also greatly helped me, especially with the character craft and the small details, all the small details. Um, I am often like how should I say it? Not praise, but I'm told that a lot of readers, when they read about like the finer details of like especially the everyday life things, let's say a small conversation here about like a minor everyday thing, or a mention of a show, or some small household item, something that for them is just like your grandma's favorite wooden spoon, but to us it's like a futuristic sci-fi gadget, and it's quite interesting. So yeah, I managed to do that too. So thanks to the role play and the years of DMing.
Yeah, because there's definitely a lot of these smaller things you got to worry about too, as well. You know what capabilities does your average player has? How does he encounter the world? What kind of weapons are all around them? You know, who makes these weapons? For me, I get really meticulous into the lore, which is why I want to dive into that. Like, I haven't even went heavy on TTRPG or the idea of TTRPG, and I was already making corporations who primarily make weapons, and then they make these type of weapons, and then the rival corporation is this corporation, and they're over that. Like, I already had all this deep lore already set up with the meticulous details already being created, primarily just because that's how my mind works. I think about these things when I'm reading a majority of stories, like, well, I wonder how who built that, or why they built that, or why is this here in particular. All that gets my mind jogging. So when I hear all these awesome tabletop stories, I'm like, oh man, my world is just rife and ready. I'm only a couple steps away, I feel. But clearly it would come down to the meticulous mechanics to fit it all in and things of that nature, which is definitely, like, whenever I'm approaching something new, and that is new to me, I take it very slowly. I give it as much respect as possible, so that way when I actually start to do something, I don't trip over myself in the midst of it.
That's a good approach.
Yeah, definitely. And something to note with that too is that the complexity of it. Even if you have a world that in your head is complex, the complexity of it on display doesn't have to be deep, and really the complexity of it doesn't actually have to be deep either. In the end, it's all about the verisimilitude. It's all about presenting it in a way that feels believable, feels real, and lets people involved, be they readers or players, get invested. you know like, that's why for me, when it comes to writing, something I prefer that some some fantasy writers don't. I prefer soft magic systems that are, lightly explained, but really lean a lot on feelings of the mystic and the unusual for magic, of magic being this force that isn't so much like a new form of science, but has that spiritualism about it that makes it more difficult to fully comprehend. And something that's rare also. It's something I tend to enjoy a little bit more than the magic systems that are particularly heavy, where everyone uses magic for everything. Mostly just because you see that in a lot of fantasy media now. So for me, it's sort of like, it's just not as interesting to me anymore. Of course, it always depends on how it's handled. If it's handled well, I'll still like it. But
and that's basically the old school storyteller around the campfire in the olden days, or in the tavern, who is telling about mystical wizards and ancient heroes from the time of Atlantis, or like almost like a Conan-esque style of mysticism and magic, which is also one of my favorite. I don't like, if I have to explain something which is quite important to move the plot ahead, I will, because I do not want to pull like invisible Charlies for my readers, and especially when I'm doing like some strategizing and stuff. Of course, there will be surprises, but they have to know. They have to know, and they have to feel part of everything that is happening, and not be just like gobsmacked with us, like, "Ooh, here this like superstar destroyer that they just had in their back pocket, and they're just like popping it out of on the battlefield, and like now you feel dumb. What just happened?"
Yeah. And one of the reasons, too, that I like the softer approach is that you can kind of toy with it potentially a little bit more. And again, it really depends all on how it's handled, how it's presented. Just for kind of a somewhat contemporary example, I look at, what's effectively the magic system of something like Avatar: The Last Airbender. It's pretty rigid. You've got your firebenders, earthbenders, waterbenders, and airbenders, and how they're able to do that is dependent on their birth. Whether or not you can bend is like, that's something you're born with, and it's tied to a specific style of martial art and doesn't tend to vary too much from there. Legend of Korra kind of broke some of that stuff, but we don't talk about that here.
Legend of Korra does not exist.
Yeah, we just don't talk about that here. But compare that to like the setting that I've been writing a lot of my stories in, which is itself was grown from actually kind of like what you've been doing with some of the role play stuff you had done, James, where it was a systemless freeform role play setting that was originally years ago. I met up with a couple of friends and like their friends and acquaintances, and joined in on one that was just loosely based on Final Fantasy. So, it was all based on classes, and we tracked health and limit breaks and all that stuff. It was very much just kind of like playing with the pastiche of Final Fantasy, but in basically their own sort of world, own sort of setting that we all kind of added ingredients into that pot. And then from that, many years later, about technically 7 years ago at this point, but 5 that it had been published, one of my friends from there met up with me. She had been going to art school throughout the whole time she was working on that, went to work in an actual graphic design job after that fact. And she reached back out to me because she knew I wrote pretty consistently, and asked like, "Hey, I kind of want to make a series based off of those games we did." And I wasn't too sure about it at first. We kind of batted back and forth, sort of bandied ideas, And eventually it all sort of clicked into an idea that I was like, actually, okay, I generally like this. I like this. And we started working out details. And then from that birthed the webcomic that I worked on a
Yeah,
few
I
years back,
remember
Phoenix
this one.
Rising. Yeah, which is also linked on my
That was
Substack
fun.
page as well. Sadly, it's been on hiatus for the last over a year. It's not likely to pick up anytime soon because her work schedule has gotten absolutely insane. She has no time to work on pages anymore. And she did all the art for that. I did the writing, I scripted stuff, but all the art, all the paneling, all the coloration, all of that stuff, she handled strictly by herself. She was very protective of that. And I don't blame her, particularly now with the issue of AI cutting into everything and how much that's freaking out and pissing so many people off. I do not blame her for being as protective as she was. I think she was very smart to be. Um, but given that, she's in a place where she can't really continue that for the foreseeable future, that is part of what spurred me to start up my Substack and started getting me to write some of these stories. Most, if not all, the stories on my Substack, except for like a couple pretty obvious notable exceptions, such as there was a Macabre Monday one from a couple months ago I wrote. I can't remember the name of it, but that was set in the real world. That was set in like the modern. It wasn't at all based on my stuff, but my stories that I've written with Geyer, some of the little short stories that I've written around it, but also the big one I've been working on, my monthly fantasy serial, The Castle on the Hill. These are all actually set in the same world. They're set in different regions of the same world. So where with the story of In the Giant Shadow, a lot of the magic and mysticism in that has to do with dreams. So I get a little bit into the mechanics of how dreams in this world work, because in the setting, dreams are a realm unto themselves. When you dream, your consciousness is entering a separate realm as you sleep, and that can have effects on you in the real world. So I play with some of these mechanics to sort of build a mystery that is like effectively at the heart. It's a mystery story that's wrapped in the elements of dark pulp fantasy. While at the same time, I've got this more kind of adventurous, family-oriented kind of high fantasy, which some people have described as almost feeling like like a golden age Disney animation converted into a written story. One of my readers actively described it to being like the animated Beauty and the Beast, which I was like, God damn, that is some high praise. But you've got this other portion of the world where there's a big element of magic on display in that the Misty Valley, which is the setting this story takes place in, quite literally has a giant floating castle floating on a bed of clouds above it.
Oh yes, I distinctly remember that most of the subscribers that I attracted also and read my stuff, they loved that story in particular, and I know that some of them are actively waiting for the next part, but. Since we are starting a new game and you have a new character, perhaps after we have like been in some amazing adventures and went like deep in the lore, especially in the mystery of the cryptids and other monsters and ghosts and non-life of Star Shutter, plus the whole glorious world of based moral officers. Maybe you will write something about it. I don't know. That's
I mean, I might at some point.
yeah. We'll
I
see.
had mentioned to you like a few years ago. I mean, I did have a couple of ideas for stories set within your universe to write as kind of like short one-offs. But one thing I'm kind of curious about is, James, I know you've got a pretty expansive universe that you've been working on the details of on your Substack. I haven't had much chance to actually like really dig in and read that yet, though I've been subscribed to you for a while. I need to actually make the time to really dig in and read some
That's
of
the
that.
problem with us writers.
Well, yeah,
It's the writer issue. It's hard to consume.
yeah, it's like you got to balance the time between writing stuff, dealing with your day to day, reading other people. There's never going to be enough time of the day for everything. But one of the things I'm kind of curious about is how you like to handle magic in your setting.
Magic, it's very interesting because I want to steer away from the word magic and how it's traditionally used, where in this world magic is called understanding, and the way it's used is it's a mixture of like spirituality and martial arts, and instead of like leaning on one too much, it kind of bridged them together. And I created a like pseudo X-Men style thing where there's this whole nation where they're all kind of naturally born with it, but amongst them, they're born with particular gifts because they may have the ability to use their understanding to morph and to change the world around them, do the lovely sparkly magic shows that people love in a variety of IPs. But to actually learn the much more complex things is like learning a style of martial arts. And to master it, some people have to dedicate their entire lives to just learning this particular aspect, even though they have all the potential to unlock it all. At the same time, the spirituality aspect is there's forms of it that are like corrupt, and they're more considered, instead of being pure, they have a cost to using them that is chronic and long lasting. And this kind is more so like a taint amongst the earth, where it can seep into the sand, into the mud, into the trees. And when it combines itself with these elements, each of them actually gives a boon, and like I said, a corruption a cost. So if you drink the water that is tainted, a tainted water with tainted understanding, you actually have a longer lifespan. But in turn, it actually messes with your mentality. It buffs up your body to makes you nice and strong, but then you become kind of weak in the mind, much more furious and angry the longer you take it. So it's really heavily entwined into the world, and kind of at the same time not, because you can't have something this powerful out there in the world that morphs and changes everything. So I had to put limitations on it, because one, it's almost like an unlimited power, but when you unlock it, as you become more powerful, the more you have to focus on controlling that power. So the sort of like the sages and the mystics that know of this, they kind of they encourage those that they teach, don't aim to be the most powerful, because essentially your power is just going to get out of hand and you're going to end up harming yourself and those around you, or you're going to have to segregate yourself because your entire life is now focused on keeping your own power in control. And in vice versa, that for which is in the world is in very isolated and secluded places where man usually does not go. And then that taint kind of morphs the environment into much more fantastical realms, if you will. So the magic's kind of like everywhere throughout it. And it's weaved in a lot of the storytelling, and a lot of the storytelling not so much weaved into it. I try to make it or balance it out so much where people can have these stories, because the ultimate goal for my world was just a place where I can fit all the stories that are already in my mind and just kind of have a place to house them all in. So everything is meticulously placed and thought out of, so that way it can fit as much story as possible.
Yeah, that's an efficient way, quite the efficient way of doing it, because you're not wasting precious world building and character craft time.
And another thing that I do, because I know we were talking earlier about not getting too meticulous, because a nice general setting can be good enough. Another thing I do, because I know I get meticulous, is I try to create. I think of lore into three boundaries. I think of deep lore, shallow lore, and then what I call like just base lore. The base lore is like when you look at it, which you can kind of get just by looking at it. Shallow lore is when you start learning the names, the places, what's going on here, there. Then the deep lore is how it all comes together. And the shallow lore aspect, I try to give everything a very generic type of name you can easily remember, because it's going to be more so the mechanics of it all that are going to be the meticulous things.
Yeah, definitely. And in a way, I've kind of got those three levels to my setting as well with Pelennor. Um, on the surface, you've got a lot of the pretty standard fantasy stuff on the surface. You dig a little deeper, you start getting specific locations with specific events, this and that. You dig deeper than that, and though I talked about, hey, kind of keep things simple. I do kind of generally keep things simple when it comes to the stories I write and the plots that I present. I don't tend to dig too deep into the stuff that I've developed, but I've developed a full multiverse of different realms that intersect and overlap with each other to create this the central material world. Which, given that most of what I write is in the Viking-themed portion of my setting, you could basically just call it Midgard. I guess that would be fair.
Yeah, it's good when we do like all the necessary planning, and we have, like James mentioned, like the different levels of different planes of lore. So the reader is then like they're there, and the reader has a choice. Basically, how deep do they dive, or like would it be just like a shallow, leisurely swim, something with like scuba suit, or like a really deep dive with these like bulky, huge mechanic suits with the mixed atmosphere without which you would like your lungs will burst. So yeah, that's the way. That's the way. For me, that's the way.
Yeah, because like when you're building a world, you eventually want to introduce people to it, and I think one thing that I'm not sure how much people go out there and say, oh, I just want to build a world in general, without ever introducing someone into it. You always got to worry about that introduction. I think especially with any form of RP, and that has to be like part of your marketing campaign to get people excited, is that initial introduction. This is what the world's about. This is my elevator pitch. This is kind of what I want to do with it. And as a writer, a lot of writers don't want to think about marketing too much, but that's a part of getting your stuff out there in general.
Yeah,
And I keep
that's important.
and like another thing I said, an aspect of the multifaceted attaching your writing world to your TTRPG, and your TTRPG to a possible writing world is the ability to not only introduce people but to entice them, because these stories become their own as they're interacting with them, and then they themselves want to write in your world. It's a great way to attract writers to be for your fiction.
Yep, pretty much. um I don't know. Do you remember, guys, who was like the first reader or player who actually really like he or she like made a short dive, uh like a tasted, like a sample of your world building, and then they immediately loved it?
Recently,
Yeah,
for the
no.
subset, well, I mean, yeah, because first in general, um, probably would have been my friend Jimmy, whom I've known him since the fourth grade. I've known him since he was the one that I had talked about. It was his stepdad who taught me to play D&D. But yeah, so it was probably him, but that's because I think in that case, that's because when we were younger, we did a lot of that world building stuff together. He never really ended up getting into writing, but he loved thinking of like wild ideas and new worlds and stuff like that because he was always playing these games too. So he was one that early on, when I was a lot younger, was one of the first to really get into that when I would do it with him. But in terms of when I really started sharing my writing more publicly, which really was just in these last few years, probably the first one to really dig deep into it, technically speaking, it would be the artist that I worked with Phoenix Rising on. Because she had general ideas, general rules about certain things of the world. In particular, there's a location that I mentioned a few times in my novellas called Osiris or Osiris. I can't remember exactly. I think she always said that it's supposed to be pronounced Osiris, but I've never pronounced it like that because it's not spelled in a way that would ever make me think that's how it's pronounced. But that portion of the setting is her brainchild. I'll drop references to it, drop the name a few times, kind of hint a couple things here and there. But out of respect to that being something that she specifically developed, I'm not going to write anything from my stuff in terms of like on my Substack. I'm not really going to write any stories set in that. But when it came to bringing our broader world together, building that stuff, a lot of that stuff was stuff I developed. And so she was the first one to really get stuck in, get heavy with that. Black Knight, you probably remember when we launched the Sword and Saturday thing on Substack, when I launched that with the Brothers Kryn months ago, how they ran that first contest to write a story that had a romantic subplot in it. And I wrote that story about the two primitive brothers, Black Paw and White Eye. That jungle that it was set in, that jungle Deccan that it was set in, and the ship that fell is in the comic. It's the opening portions of the comic. I don't remember if you read that, but those opening chapters, the main group is hiding out in the jungle and they're kind of exploring, trying to find supplies, and they find a downed airship. That airship from the comic is the one that crashed at the beginning of that story. So again, kind of going with the interconnectedness of all that stuff, that jungle, the airship crash, all that stuff, the stuff she and I worked on together, but like 90% of that was my brainchild, and she was just hooked on it. Was like, yes, this is great. We're doing this 100%. Let's go. And then other than that, in terms of when I started sharing my actual like prose and stuff on Substack, it would have been Joseph Weiss. He was the first one, like particularly when In the Giant Shadow was being posted, serialized. Every single chapter he was reading it, and that's when I learned that you can tell how invested he's getting in it based on how he's writing his comments. If he gives like one or two words, a couple lines, it's like, oh, he was into it. But not really. If he starts kind of digging deep into stuff, he's into it. When he writes poems, then he's all in. He wrote a poem in every single one of those. It was like, oh shit.
By the way, he was probably one of the first like deeply invested in my series readers from Minds, and I kind of probably encouraged him when he was writing like really short snippets of different stories on Minds, like as comments. His journey is quite amazing. But in my case, I've had perhaps There was two. My first DM was also a girlfriend of mine, and she really liked the beginning, like the initial world building of Star Shuttle. Because back then I was like building the framework of it, and she immediately fell in love with it. Um, she kind of kept asking me different questions about and how are they doing this, and how are their ships moving, and what is their fuel, and do they have special fuel, and why do the engines do that, and why do the shields do that, and what is this like space magic capable of, and this and that, like different questions, which I think I still have like a small notebook, which I wrote the questions with a pencil, like a really old pencil. And then there was a player also back in the day who was perhaps one of my first international players. Was from Germany, and he really fell in love in the spacers, like the spacer culture of Star Shattered. And he played, I think, in 6 or maybe 7 of my games, and he always made spacers. He was really in love in this part of the world. He immediately fell in love. Like, he was like, oh, but do they have music, and do they have like special like a part of their culture which is devoted to different celebratory foods, and do they have like games and this and that? Oh, uh, I love this guy. I hope he's well. Klaus, if you're listening to me, and I hope you're well and doing great.
Yeah, and that touches on probably one of the most valuable things that comes from kind of testing some of your ideas that you want to write about in tabletop, particularly if you're doing the world building side of it, is that if you happen to find someone like Klaus who really gets attracted to like one particular part of your setting and gets stuck in with that, they will ask you the questions that you might not have considered, and then you'll start getting ideas on like what you should think about. What about their music? What about their preferred kinds of food? What do they do in their free time? How much time are the spacers actually spending in space versus planet side? So on and so forth. Like all these ideas that he brought up to you that maybe you didn't consider
Yeah,
when you were initially writing those books.
yeah, exactly. That's the one of the wonders of the tabletops.
Got a question here for you. From the picture, Star Shatter is a single pilot laser common multi-system game. Yes.
No, that's I wasn't aware that there was a game, like a computer game, but there was back in the day. I had no idea. Uh, Otherwise, Star Shatter is the name of a starship, like the main character uh, group of heroes, and that's their starship. This is like the hallmark of the series. Uh, so yeah, it's when you go to Amazon, you can find it.
And in terms of the tabletop game portion of it, it's a 3.5 D&D hack that the Black Knight developed.
Yeah, total conversion. Like like with lots of elements from Pathfinder and pretty unique mechanics which I've developed and tested over the years. Unfortunately, it's not for sale because of the current maladies with the D&D and stuff, which and my own time constraints, which I can't, as you know, I cannot work enough hours of the day to actually complete both the books and like the handbook, the player's handbook, which I did have plans on doing it, but yeah, it's well, Derry, this is the our current campaign that we're playing on YouTube, which is streamed every other weekend, and it's set in the same setting of the books. So watch it if you can. We've had like a lot of sessions so far, and we hope to continue.
Yeah, you definitely touch on something there. That's a delegation of time. Basically, when it comes to all creative, what's the term I'm looking for? When it comes to all creativity, when you're going to pen it down, when you plan on something, making of it, I think time delegation, above all, is probably like one of the most important things. Because if I think of when I first started writing, obviously I was terrible, like everybody is when they first start writing. But if it wasn't for the large amount of time I literally dedicated to it, I probably wouldn't have improved as much as I had, to the point where I pretty much consider myself at least a competent writer right now. And how long did it actually take you to Black Knight to make your system with all that time delegation? Like
Ooh,
what did that look like? What was that like? Starting
about
from scratch, making a system.
about 10 years with all the testing included. Like the initial part of it was 2.5 years, and then we tested it. It was terrible. Some of the new mechanics I had to scrap and build new ones, and then we tested them, and then I built more stuff, and then we tested it. We tested characters, because the characters are built from scratch. They have almost nothing to do with the original D&D characters. Mechanics wise, like the core stats remain, but you have like some feats which you can still say that they're D&D-ish, but then you have like a huge whopping like list of new feats and new mechanics which have been totally tested. They work. They are, for the most part, quite streamlined and fluid. They allow like fast-paced combat, fluid combat, with hard-hitting weapons, good armor technology, shields, space magics, and like, yeah, it took like about 10 years to finally like fix all the kinks and make sure that like the later stages were like the spaceship crafting system and the mecha crafting system and the vehicle crafting system, which is all like almost the same, utilitarian, but allows like a lot of wiggle room, and you can build a ton of stuff. I mean, our guest can attest. He even crafted his uniform, which is a thing that not very many systems allow. Which, yeah, That's
Not bad, man. I mean, if you're gonna put 10 years into it, you probably got one hell of a system on your hands then.
and I got to hear a whole lot of universe, because while I was working on that, I was like filtering lots of new ideas for world building and characters and stories and plots and stuff through the games. So
Nice.
I was doing it. Yeah.
Nice. All right. Well, we've reached hour 30-minute mark. That's usually when we like to wrap everything up. Everybody, give yourself a shout out before we go.
All right. I guess I'll start.
Yep.
I am the man behind the screen, formerly here on YouTube, but not for quite a few years. But you can find me over on Substack. I've got 2 stacks available for my fiction and some musings about writing and tabletop gaming. You can find me at Tales of Calamity and Triumph.substack.com. That's all one word. And we'll put a pinned comment after the stream with links to all our stacks after this. And for some nonfiction stuff, like interesting stories in terms of things I've encountered in my day-to-day life, you can also subscribe to my second Substack, which is awkwardrealities.substack.com.
Oh yeah, James.
All right. If everybody, I've been kind of telling you about the world without end for a while now. Obviously, it's the name of the channel. Right now, I'm currently writing a novella / part 2 to a short story that actually did pretty good. And to kind of keep the readers busy, every month I've been releasing a faction introduction to introduce a new faction into the world. And with it, you'll get details of the land, of how they govern areas, or how they play into the surrounding locale and things of that nature. And you can find all that at my personal Substack. That's worldwithoutendlore.substack.com. And with every faction introduction, they come with their own faction song, and I post a lyrical video along with each of those. We have introduced 3 factions so far, I think, and I'm slowly going to just crawl across the map, introducing factions and getting some writing done on the back end. If you want to check that out, that's worldwithoutendlore.substack.com. All right, over to you, Black Knight.
Well, you can either find me on Substack, which is the Black Knight, substack.com, where I post a whole lot of my stories, which most of them are sci-fi, space opera, set in the universe of my Star Shutter book series, which you can find on Amazon. You can either just write Star Shutter or write my name, Black Knight, and you should be able to find them. So far as my Substack, I have also been working on a pure old school JRPG inspired and also tabletop inspired fantasy novella, which you will be able to read for free on Substack until I'm able to publish it one day soon, I hope. And it will join my already 11 published books, which you can find on Amazon through my profile. So that, as they say, is that, dear friends.
All right.
And
Thank
I
you,
think-
everybody, for tuning in to the stream. And thanks, man, behind the screen, for joining us today.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me. It was a good time.
All right. We're checking out, everybody. Thank you so much for stopping by. Could have been anywhere. You chose to be here with us.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye,
Thank
world.
you.